You can't park that commercial vehicle here. Rules are rules.
That's what HOA President Karen screamed as the ambulance pulled into my driveway. My 16-year-old son Tommy, severely disabled with uncontrollable epilepsy, was in full grand mal seizure on the living room floor. Body convulsing, foam at his mouth, barely breathing. I'm on the phone begging 911 to hurry. Sirens scream closer, red lights flashing through the windows. The ambulance pulls up and Karen plants herself between the vehicle and our front door, arms flailing, demanding the paramedics move to street parking 200 yards away, all because of her precious no commercial vehicles rule. The lead paramedic brushed past her.
Ma'am, this is a medical emergency. Step aside.
But Karen followed them to our door, phone out, documenting violations while my son fought for his life inside. She stood there, timing the response, photographing equipment, treating my family's crisis like a property inspection. That night, she put paperwork above my boy's life. Big mistake. She had no idea what a desperate dad would do to protect his son. What would you do? Drop your worst HOA horror story below. Mine ends with their clubhouse in rubble. Let me back up and tell you how we got here. My name's Marcus Palmer, 45, union electrician who learned the hard way that some battles choose you whether you're ready or not. My son Tommy has severe epilepsy and spina bifida. Picture a kid who's sharper than most adults but trapped in a body that betrays him without warning. Grand mal seizures hit him 3, sometimes 4 times a month. When they do, every second counts. Brain damage starts after 5 minutes without intervention. We live in Willowbrook Estates, one of those Phoenix suburbs where the grass stays greener than a golf course because they fine you $50 if it isn't. I inherited our modest corner lot from my late wife Sarah. She'd be rolling in her grave seeing what this place became under Karen's regime. The medical bills run about $3,200 monthly. Specialized equipment, anti-seizure medications that cost more than most people's rent, the modified van that set me back $47,000. Tommy's worth every penny, but the financial strain feels like carrying concrete blocks uphill in August heat. Enter Karen Pemberton, 48 years old, fake blonde hair teased higher than her moral standards, real estate agent with the soul of a parking meter and twice the appetite for coins. She clawed her way to HOA president by promising to elevate our community standards. Translation: make life hell for anyone who doesn't fit her country club fantasy. Karen's got this thing about disabled people that makes my skin crawl. Calls Tommy's wheelchair visually depressing. Says his medical equipment compromises the neighborhood aesthetic. The woman actually timed our ambulance arrivals with a stopwatch, snapping photos like some demented wildlife photographer documenting endangered species. The smell of her designer perfume, something called Obsession that lived up to its name, mixed with spite could choke a horse at 50 yards. Karen wasn't just power hungry. She was financially desperate. Real estate agent in a brutal market, new money trying to maintain appearances while drowning in debt. Her true motivation became crystal clear when I discovered her confidential listing, my corner lot marked as a high-value development opportunity worth $340,000 for luxury townhomes. The woman was literally calculating my son's suffering in commission dollars. Our community had become a battlefield. In Karen's corner stood the social climbers, families desperate to appear wealthy, new residents who worshipped property values like a religion. They'd nod along to anything Karen said, terrified of becoming her next target. Supporting us were the real neighbors, Rosa Martinez, a nurse who understood medical necessity, and elderly Mr. Patterson, a Korean war vet who recognized tyranny when he saw it. But most folks stayed neutral, heads down, hoping Karen's attention would pass over them like a tornado. The breaking point came during last month's emergency community standards meeting. Karen stood at that mahogany podium she'd imported from some foreclosed law office, announcing new medical vehicle restriction policies, like she was reading a death warrant. Effective immediately, she declared, her acrylic nails drumming against the microphone. Ambulances are classified as commercial vehicles. They create traffic disruption, property damage from heavy tire pressure, and significant aesthetic concerns affecting our community's prestigious image. The conference room smelled like stale coffee and fresh fear sweat from intimidated homeowners. I stood up, Tommy beside me in his wheelchair. What about medical emergencies? Karen's smile could have flash-frozen the Sahara. Mr. Palmer, medical emergencies don't grant exemptions from community standards. Perhaps your family should consider alternative living arrangements better suited to your special needs." The room went dead quiet. Even the humming fluorescent lights seemed to hold their breath. "You're seriously telling me to let my son die for your property values?" "I'm telling you that rules apply equally to everyone, no exceptions." That's when I realized this wasn't about rules. Karen Pemberton had just declared war on my son's right to exist in her perfect little kingdom, and she had no idea she'd just picked a fight with the wrong father. 3 days later, Karen made it official through proper legal channels, the way bureaucrats prefer to destroy lives. She sent me a certified letter requiring a formal, reasonable accommodation request under Fair Housing Act guidelines for Tommy's medical access needs. The community center reeked of industrial carpet cleaner and Karen's territorial ambitions when she explained the process. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like angry wasps while she arranged her papers with the precision of a general planning invasion. She'd packed the room with her usual supporters while I sat with Tommy and Rosa, feeling like defendants in a rigged trial. Federal fair housing law requires us to consider reasonable accommodation requests for disabled residents, Karen announced with the enthusiasm of someone discussing root canal procedures. Mr. Palmer will submit proper documentation for frequent emergency vehicle access. The paperwork requirements were Byzantine. Medical documentation from 3 different specialists proving medical necessity. Architectural drawings showing why our driveway access was essential versus street parking. A 47-page application that looked like someone had weaponized bureaucracy against disabled families. I spent $800 getting neurologist reports explaining why Tommy needed immediate medical access. Dr. Sarah Kim's letter was crystal clear. Patient requires immediate emergency intervention. Any delay in medical response time poses significant risk of permanent neurological damage or death. The 150-yard distance from street parking to our front door could literally mean the difference between my son's life and permanent disability. But Karen treated it like a zoning variance for a swimming pool. I hand-delivered the accommodation request to Karen's real estate office, complete with medical documentation and witness signatures from Rosa Martinez. The smell of her vanilla air freshener mixed with my determination as I watched her accept the certified envelope. 3 weeks passed. Nothing. Then came Karen's response. A form letter requesting additional clarification and scheduling a community impact assessment hearing for 6 weeks out. She was using federal accommodation law as a weapon, creating delays that could cost Tommy his life during the next emergency. But here's where Karen made her first crucial mistake. While she delayed my accommodation request indefinitely, she approved 3 other modification requests that same week. The Hendersons' decorative fountain, Janet Morrison's oversized garage door, and the Wilson family's backyard pergola. All approved within 48 hours. No impact assessments, no community hearings, no medical documentation required. From my construction days, I knew this pattern had a legal name: disparate treatment. When you approve requests quickly for some families while delaying identical requests for disabled families, you're not enforcing standards. You're discriminating under federal law. I documented everything: dates, approvals, communications, witness statements. Then I did what Karen probably hoped I'd never figure out. I filed a complaint with HUD, the Department of Housing and Urban Development. Fair Housing Act violations carry serious penalties: $16,000, $70,000 fines per incident, plus federal monitoring of all HOA decisions. Karen's little power trip had just attracted the attention of federal investigators who don't care about property values or community standards. The HUD investigator, Maria Santos, called Karen within 72 hours of my complaint. Suddenly, my accommodation request needed urgent board review, and Karen was scheduling emergency meetings to discuss compliance with federal regulations. But Karen's revenge was swift and personal. Instead of simply approving the accommodation, she announced a special public hearing to thoroughly discuss the precedent-setting implications and community safety concerns of my request. The meeting was scheduled for the community Clubhouse, a building that would soon become the center of our much bigger battle. That night, after filing my HUD complaint, I found a violation notice in my mailbox. $200 for excessive lawn sprinkler usage creating sidewalk moisture hazard. I inspected our sprinkler system that evening. It was positioned to water our lawn, nowhere near the sidewalk. Karen was literally fining me for physics: water evaporating and condensing on concrete during Phoenix summer heat. The smell of fresh ink on that bogus violation notice mixed with my rising anger like gasoline meeting a match. But I'd learned something important from my construction days. Documentation beats emotion every time. Rosa called that evening with intelligence from her position as community treasurer. "Marcus, something's bothering me about our financial records. Karen keeps saying we can't afford routine maintenance, but our reserve account should have $78,000 for repairs and emergencies." That's when I realized Karen's delays and harassment might not just be about power. They might be about covering up financial problems that would be exposed if people started demanding transparency and accountability. The HUD investigation changed everything, but not the way I expected. Federal pressure forced Karen to approve my accommodation request within 2 weeks. Tommy's ambulance could now legally park in our driveway during medical emergencies. But winning that battle only escalated the war. Karen couldn't block the ambulance anymore, so she got creative with retaliation that stayed just inside legal boundaries. Every time paramedics visited, I'd find new violation notices the next morning. Emergency vehicle tire marks on concrete surfaces. Excessive noise disturbance after 10 p.m. Improper disposal of medical waste. Apparently, the ambulance crew leaving a single gauze wrapper constituted illegal dumping. Each violation carried $150 to $300 fines. Karen was trying to financially bleed us into moving away, one bogus citation at a time. The smell of those fresh violation notices became a familiar morning routine, like coffee brewing, but with more spite and legal threats mixed in. But federal oversight had given me something powerful. Every HOA action now had to be justified to HUD investigators. Karen's harassment was creating a paper trail that would eventually destroy her. The community became increasingly divided. Rosa Martinez organized covert support meetings in her living room, the air thick with the aroma of fresh tamales and righteous anger. 23 households quietly backed our fight, afraid to speak publicly, but willing to sign witness statements about Karen's discriminatory behavior. Mr. Patterson, our Korean War veteran neighbor, shared stories of fighting authoritarianism abroad while watching it flourish in his own community. "Some people mistake a clipboard for a crown," he said, his weathered hands steady as he signed another witness statement. But Karen's supporters rallied too, like flies drawn to rotting meat. The Hendersons posted on social media about precedent-setting accommodations threatening property values. The Wilsons shared real estate articles about communities declining due to excessive medical activities. Janet Morrison actually wrote on Facebook, "Special needs don't justify special rules that burden everyone else." Then came the community board meeting to address accommodation concerns. Karen's attempt to publicly humiliate us into withdrawal. She'd packed the clubhouse with supporters and hired a consultant who specialized in community impact assessments. The man wore a $2,000 suit and carried charts showing how frequent emergency vehicles could decrease property values by 8 to 12%. Precedent-setting accommodations threaten community character, Karen announced, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd never faced real hardship. Today it's ambulances. Tomorrow we'll have commercial medical facilities operating in residential zones. Tommy sat beside me through the entire presentation, his hands gripping his wheelchair armrests until his knuckles went white. The kid understood exactly what was happening. They were debating whether his life mattered less than their property values. But the federal accommodation approval gave me legal protection. Karen couldn't rescind it without risking massive HUD sanctions and personal liability for civil rights violations. That's when she shifted tactics entirely, and Rosa's suspicions about our finances became the key to everything. Rosa Martinez, our community treasurer and my strongest ally, formally requested the annual financial review that fall. Arizona law requires HOAs to provide detailed financial statements to homeowners annually. It's not optional, it's mandatory transparency. Karen's response was immediate and suspicious. "Financial documents are being audited by our accounting firm," she claimed during the board meeting. "Results will be available after the comprehensive review process concludes." Rosa, being a former bank auditor before becoming a nurse, knew this was bureaucratic deflection. "Karen, state law requires financial transparency within 30 days of homeowner request. We need those records now." The smell of Karen's desperation mixed with expensive perfume as she fumbled for excuses. The auditing process requires additional time for comprehensive review of complex community investment transactions. Investment transactions? We had a basic HOA managing lawn care and common area maintenance. What complex investments? That night, Rosa called with news that would change everything. Marcus, I've been cross-referencing our maintenance bills against reserve fund expenditures. We should have $78,000 available for repairs, but Karen keeps claiming we're broke and can't afford basic upkeep. I started connecting dots that painted a devastating picture. Karen's real estate struggles, her desperation to acquire my corner lot, her evasiveness about community finances, her increasingly erratic behavior when questioned about money. The next morning brought confirmation of our suspicions. An anonymous letter appeared in Rosa's mailbox. Photocopied financial documents showing massive transfers from the HOA Reserve Fund to Pemberton Property Solutions LLC. Karen had been embezzling community money to fund her failing real estate investments. Every homeowner in Willowbrook Estates had been unknowingly financing her personal financial crisis. The woman who'd tried to destroy my family over ambulance parking had been stealing from the entire community for over 18 months. The anonymous financial documents Rosa received were damning, but we needed official confirmation before making public accusations. Arizona law gives homeowners the right to petition for independent HOA audits when financial irregularities are suspected. Rosa filed the formal audit request with the Arizona Department of Real Estate in November. The cost was $3,500, paid up front but reimbursable if fraud was discovered. I scraped together the money using our emergency savings. Karen's reaction to the audit request was immediate and telling. Marcus Palmer has initiated a vindictive investigation to harass elected community leadership, she announced at December's board meeting. This frivolous audit will cost thousands in legal fees to defend against false allegations. But here's the thing about honest financial management. It doesn't require expensive lawyers or complex explanations. If our books were clean, an audit would take 2 weeks and cost nothing beyond the auditor's fee. Karen's panic suggested our books weren't clean. The auditor, Janet Kim from Phoenix Financial Reviews, began work in January. Within 10 days, she'd found discrepancies that made my electrician's brain spark with recognition. This was the pattern of someone trying to hide missing money. Mr. Palmer, Janet called me on a Thursday morning. I need to discuss some serious irregularities. Can we meet privately? We met at a coffee shop near her office. The smell of espresso mixed with my growing anxiety as Janet spread out bank statements and transfer records across the small table. Your HOA's reserve fund shows concerning patterns, she began quietly. Large withdrawals disguised as emergency maintenance expenses with inadequate documentation and suspicious vendor relationships. The numbers were damning. Between June 2022 and January 2024, $67,000 had been transferred from our reserve fund to various maintenance contractors. But none of these contractors appeared in board meeting minutes. None had verifiable business licenses, and several shared addresses with Karen's real estate company. This appears to be systematic embezzlement, Janet said, her professional demeanor unable to hide her disgust. Community funds transferred to shell companies controlled by the HOA president. My hands shook as I reviewed the evidence. Karen hadn't just been fighting Tommy's medical accommodation. She'd been stealing from every family in our community to fund her failing real estate business. The timeline aligned perfectly. Karen's opposition to our accommodation request started in June 2022, exactly when the suspicious transfers began. She wasn't protecting community standards. She was protecting her criminal activity from the scrutiny that accommodation requests would bring. But the audit revealed something even more damaging. Karen's embezzlement had created a genuine maintenance crisis. Our reserve fund, which should have held $78,000 for repairs and emergencies, now contained only $11,000. The clubhouse, built in 1987, desperately needed major repairs: roof replacement, electrical upgrades, foundation work. The deferred maintenance bill was approaching $85,000. Money Karen had stolen for personal use. Janet's preliminary report was devastating. Community faces immediate financial crisis due to misappropriation of reserve funds. Recommend emergency board action, asset recovery procedures, and criminal referral to authorities. I drove home from that meeting carrying evidence that would destroy Karen's life and finally give our community honest leadership. But I also knew this information would tear our neighborhood apart and force every family to pay for Karen's crimes. Tommy was doing homework when I got home, his medical equipment humming quietly in our accessible living room. The kid who'd been called a burden on community resources was about to become the catalyst for exposing massive theft from those same community resources. "Dad, you look upset," he said, glancing up from algebra problems. "Everything okay with the HOA stuff? How do you tell your disabled son that the woman who tried to deny his medical care was also stealing money that should have kept our community safe and maintained?" "Just financial irregularities, Tommy. Nothing you need to worry about." But it wasn't nothing. Karen's crimes meant every family in Willowbrook Estates would face special assessments to cover her theft, or we'd have to sell community property to pay for repairs we couldn't afford. The woman who'd fought to protect property values had been systematically destroying them through criminal negligence and systematic theft. March brought the audit's final report, and it was worse than I'd imagined. Karen hadn't just embezzled $67,000. She'd been systematically looting our community for nearly 2 years through an elaborate shell company scheme. The records office at the county courthouse smelled like musty paper and bureaucratic indifference as Rosa and I spent a Saturday morning digging through public records that revealed the full scope of Karen's criminal enterprise. "Look at this," Rosa said, pulling up Karen's business registration files. "Pemberton Property Solutions address matches the invoices for our maintenance work." Karen hadn't just embezzled from our HOA. She'd created fake companies to launder stolen money, submitting fraudulent invoices for work that never happened. Every transaction was documented, traceable, and prosecutable under Arizona theft statutes. The money trail was methodical and damning. HOA funds transferred to Karen's business account, then immediately used as down payments on luxury properties she was flipping. Properties that failed to sell in the market downturn, leaving Karen personally liable for massive mortgages she couldn't afford. My hands actually shook as I traced the financial paper trail. The smell of old records mixed with my rising fury as the scope of Karen's betrayal became clear. But the records revealed something even more devastating: Karen's personal financial desperation. Her real estate business was failing catastrophically, with clients suing for misrepresentation and the state investigating licensing violations. She needed our money to avoid personal bankruptcy, I realized, scanning loan documents and credit reports that showed massive personal debt. The embezzlement wasn't greed, it was survival. Rosa found the smoking gun in court filing records. Karen was facing foreclosure on her own home, default on business loans, and civil lawsuits from clients whose properties she'd mismanaged. The woman lecturing us about financial responsibility was financially destroyed. The timeline aligned perfectly. Karen's theft accelerated as her business problems worsened, reaching $67,000 stolen over 18 months. She'd been systematically looting our community to prevent her own financial collapse. From my construction experience, I knew that embezzlement of community association funds over $50,000 constitutes felony theft under Arizona law, carrying sentences of 2 to 4 years plus full restitution. Karen wasn't just facing civil lawsuits, she was looking at state criminal charges. But the financial discovery opened an even bigger problem. The community clubhouse, deprived of maintenance funding for 2 years, had deteriorated into a genuine safety hazard. Monday brought building inspection results that confirmed our worst fears. Inspector Mike Rodriguez found 23 safety violations requiring immediate attention: structural problems, electrical hazards, plumbing failures, fire code violations. "This building is unsafe for public occupancy," Mike's report concluded. "Recommend immediate closure pending major repairs estimated at $89,000. Our depleted reserve fund couldn't cover those repairs because Karen had stolen the money. Arizona building codes don't negotiate with unsafe structures. Property owners have 90 days to complete required repairs or face forced demolition by municipal authorities. If we couldn't afford repairs, Phoenix would tear down the building and bill us for the work." But that night, researching demolition law in my garage, I discovered something that would change everything. Arizona Property Code allows owners to demolish unsafe structures on their own property if they follow proper safety protocols and obtain permits. The key phrase: property owners may execute emergency demolition of hazardous structures to protect community welfare. I could legally tear down Karen's symbol of power with my own hands. Thursday brought news from the Maricopa County Attorney's Office that sealed Karen's fate. Detective Sarah Williams called to inform me that Karen would be charged with felony theft, fraudulent schemes, and computer fraud. "Mr. Palmer, we have sufficient evidence for prosecution," Detective Williams explained. "Mrs. Pemberton is facing 3 to 5 years in state prison plus full restitution to the community." That evening, Tommy and I sat in our kitchen reviewing the evidence that would send our tormentor to prison. The same table where we'd worried about medical bills and HOA harassment now held documents proving our community's president was a criminal. "Dad," Tommy said, looking up from his homework, "she tried to hurt us because she was already hurting herself." The kid's insight consistently amazed me. Karen's attacks on our family weren't about community standards. They were about a desperate criminal trying to deflect attention from her own crimes while stealing money to cover her failures. Rosa called that night with our final piece of strategic planning. "Marcus, I found something important about property demolition rights. As community members, we can petition to demolish the unsafe building ourselves if the HOA can't afford professional contractors." Karen's crimes had created the legal justification for me to personally destroy her symbol of power. The next phase required precision, timing, and the kind of hands-on justice that would make my late wife Sarah proud. We weren't just planning a demolition. We were orchestrating Karen's complete public downfall through direct action. Rosa's living room became our coordination center, the coffee table buried under demolition permits, equipment manuals, and community petition signatures, while the smell of fresh tamales mixed with the electricity of impending personal justice. "First things first," Rosa said, spreading the building safety assessment across her dining table. "We need official city approval for owner-operated demolition." I'd already contacted my union buddy Mike Rodriguez, the certified building inspector who'd condemned the clubhouse. Mike explained the legal pathway for property owner demolition when HOA funds weren't available for professional contractors. Under Arizona law, property owners can execute emergency demolition of hazardous structures, Mike confirmed, his clipboard thick with code citations. "You'll need permits, safety training, proper equipment, and insurance coverage, but it's completely legal." The sound of his approval echoed in my chest like justice finding its voice. Phase 2 meant learning to operate demolition equipment safely and legally. Danny Martinez, Rosa's cousin who ran a demolition company, agreed to teach me excavator operation and safety protocols. "Emergency demolition's about community protection," Danny explained as I practiced with his small excavator in an empty lot. "Besides, after what that witch did to your family, watching you personally tear down her kingdom will be beautiful." The smell of diesel fuel and determination surrounded me as I learned to control the machine that would deliver personal justice. Phase 3 was all about timing and maximum symbolic impact. We needed witnesses, media coverage, and Karen's complete humiliation happening simultaneously. Tommy's social media strategy was brilliant. Coordinate the demolition with Karen's scheduled monthly board meeting. "Imagine her trying to conduct business while you personally demolish the building around her," Tommy said, his fingers flying across the keyboard. "The visual will be perfect. Corruption literally crumbling under the weight of justice." From my construction experience, I knew that owner-operated demolition requires specific safety protocols: utility disconnection, debris containment, dust control, emergency vehicle access. Following every regulation would prove this was legal justice, not vigilante destruction. Rosa coordinated community support with military precision. 87 households had signed petitions supporting owner-operated demolition as necessary for public safety, and as justice for Karen's theft. "We'll have food trucks, live music, and children's activities," Rosa explained, her planning evident in detailed safety arrangements. "Make it a community celebration of direct action against corruption," Mr. Patterson, applying military logistics to civilian justice, coordinated with emergency services to ensure proper safety during my personal demolition. "Structural collapse doesn't respect property lines," he explained. "Everyone's safety depends on you doing this right." Janet Woolsey, our inside source on the HOA board, provided crucial intelligence about Karen's deteriorating mental state. The woman was spiraling into paranoid mode, convinced that federal investigators and community members were conspiring against her. "She's been calling board members at midnight demanding loyalty oaths," Janet reported. "Yesterday she accused the mail carrier of being part of your surveillance network." Perfect. Desperate people make public mistakes that destroy their credibility. Thursday brought our final preparation phase: media coordination and legal protection. Channel 12 News agreed to film my personal demolition as the climax of their ongoing investigation into HOA corruption. "Owner-operated demolition of a corrupt official's headquarters," the producer explained excitedly. "This is the kind of direct justice story that goes viral." Tommy had worked his social media magic, building anticipation across disability advocacy networks nationwide. The hashtag personal justice was trending locally with over 4,000 posts supporting direct action against institutional oppression. "Dad," Tommy said Friday night, reviewing our comprehensive preparation, "this isn't just about tearing down a building. You're showing every family that sometimes justice requires personal action." The smell of fresh printed permits mixed with Sarah's memory as I looked at our accessible kitchen, thinking about how my late wife would have loved seeing me take direct action to protect our son and community. Saturday morning, everything was ready. Excavator delivered and inspected, safety equipment confirmed, media staging area prepared, community celebration organized. Karen's monthly meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. in the condemned clubhouse. She had no idea that at 10:15 a.m. I would personally begin destroying her symbol of power with my own hands. The time for legal procedures had passed. This was about personal justice, delivered directly by a father who'd been pushed too far. Karen's response to learning about my personal demolition plan was swift, desperate, and increasingly detached from legal reality. Within 48 hours of the demolition permits being posted publicly, she hired Phoenix's most expensive white-collar criminal defense attorney and launched a counterattack that would have impressed a dying rattlesnake. The first sign of her desperation came Thursday morning, a certified letter demanding I appear at an emergency disciplinary hearing for planning terrorist destruction of community property. The paper smelled like expensive legal fees and pure panic, with letterhead so pretentious it could have choked a peacock. But Karen wasn't just threatening lawsuits. She was orchestrating a character assassination campaign against my personal demolition plan. Anonymous flyers appeared in mailboxes across the neighborhood, claiming I was an unstable individual planning violent destruction, and that Tommy's disability was being exploited to justify domestic terrorism. The flyers included photos of demolition equipment with warnings about imminent neighborhood destruction. "Dad, they're trying to make you look dangerous for standing up to corruption," Tommy explained, his voice steady despite the propaganda aimed at our family. "But everyone knows this is about legal justice, not terrorism." The kid's clarity cut through Karen's desperation campaign like truth through lies. Karen's social media blitz was equally hysterical. Professional crisis management firms flooded community pages with posts about rogue property owners threatening community safety and unqualified individuals operating dangerous machinery. She'd hired multiple PR firms to make my legal demolition look like vigilante destruction. But Karen made a crucial mistake in her panic. She overplayed her hand with tactics that exposed her own criminal guilt. Monday morning brought news that made my determination crystallize into steel resolve. Karen had contacted Child Protective Services again, filing a report claiming I was planning to expose my disabled son to industrial hazards during unsafe demolition activities. The CPS investigator who responded was the same Sarah Williams who'd dismissed Karen's previous false reports. She reviewed my demolition permits, safety protocols, and equipment training certifications with professional thoroughness. "Mr. Palmer," she concluded, "your demolition plan follows all safety regulations. Your son will be in a secure viewing area with professional supervision. This complaint appears to be harassment designed to interfere with legal property maintenance activities." Another documentation of Karen's abuse of government systems to harass families pursuing justice. But the investigation revealed something that made my demolition plan even more symbolically perfect. Karen had filed false complaints about my dangerous activities with multiple city departments, claiming I was operating without permits and threatening public safety. Every false report was documented evidence of her systematic abuse of authority to prevent accountability for her crimes. Wednesday evening brought Karen's most desperate legal gambit yet. She filed for a temporary restraining order to halt my demolition, claiming I was an emotionally unstable individual planning revenge destruction of community property. Her sworn statement claimed that allowing me to personally demolish the clubhouse would set a dangerous precedent for vigilante property destruction and threaten community safety through unqualified heavy equipment operation. The hearing was scheduled for Friday morning, one day before my planned demolition. But Karen's restraining order application included something that would destroy her credibility. Detailed claims about my mental instability and revenge motivations that contradicted all evidence of my legal, safety-compliant demolition plan. Her desperation was creating documented proof of her own detachment from reality. Thursday brought news that Karen's attorney was beginning to abandon her increasingly unhinged legal strategies. Word leaked that he'd recommended she withdraw the restraining order and focus on plea bargaining for the embezzlement charges. Karen had rejected his advice, convinced she could defeat criminal prosecution through aggressive attacks on my demolition plan and personal character. That evening, I sat in our accessible kitchen processing the magnitude of Karen's self-destruction while reviewing my demolition safety checklist. She'd escalated from discriminating against disabled families to filing false reports, submitting fraudulent legal documents, and waging personal war against legal property maintenance. Tommy reviewed his homework while I organized evidence of Karen's escalating desperation. Dad, she's not just fighting accountability anymore. She's fighting the idea that regular people can take direct action against corruption. The kid was absolutely right. Karen represented everything wrong with institutional power. The belief that authority figures should be immune from consequences, that communities should accept abuse rather than fighting back. Friday's restraining order hearing would bring the collision between Karen's entitlement and my legal right to personally demolish her symbol of corruption. The smell of fresh coffee mixed with anticipation as I prepared for what would either be Karen's final legal obstacle or her complete public humiliation during sworn testimony about my dangerous plan to legally tear down her criminally neglected clubhouse. Either way, Saturday morning I would personally destroy the building where she'd terrorized families for 2 years, using my own hands and legal authority to deliver justice that the system had been too slow to provide. Friday's restraining order hearing became the courtroom spectacle that finally exposed Karen's complete detachment from reality while cementing my legal right to personally demolish her symbol of corruption. Judge Patricia Santos reviewed my demolition permits, safety certifications, equipment training, and insurance coverage before addressing Karen's claims about my dangerous mental state and revenge motivations. Mrs. Pemberton, Judge Santos began, Mr. Palmer has followed every legal requirement for owner-operated emergency demolition. His permits are in order, his safety protocols exceed city requirements, and his equipment operator certification is current. What specific legal basis do you have for claiming this constitutes dangerous or unlawful activity? Karen's response revealed the depth of her psychological breakdown. Your Honor, allowing this man to personally destroy community property sets a dangerous precedent for revenge-motivated destruction. He's emotionally unstable due to his son's medical needs and seeking vigilante justice against elected officials. The judge's eyebrows rose in disbelief. Mrs. Pemberton, Mr. Palmer is following legal procedures to demolish a city-condemned building using proper safety protocols. Are you suggesting that property owners don't have the right to maintain their own property? This isn't about property maintenance, Karen shouted, her composure completely shattered. This is about a dangerous individual using his disabled son to justify destroying everything I've worked to build. The courtroom went silent as Karen admitted her true motivation, protecting her personal power rather than community safety. Judge Santos's ruling was swift and devastating. Restraining order denied. Mr. Palmer's demolition plan is legal, safe, and necessary for community welfare. Mrs. Pemberton's objections appear to be personal rather than legal, and her characterization of legal property maintenance as vigilante justice suggests a fundamental misunderstanding of property law. But the judge added something that sealed Karen's fate. Mrs. Pemberton's sworn statements about Mr. Palmer's mental state appear to be unsupported personal attacks designed to interfere with legal property maintenance. Recommend review for potential perjury charges. Another potential felony for Karen's collection. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of crystal-clear Arizona sky that made everything seem possible, including personally delivering justice with heavy machinery. By 8 a.m., our neighborhood looked like a combination community festival and historical documentation event. Food trucks lined the street while news cameras positioned for optimal angles to film my personal demolition of corruption's headquarters. Nearly 200 community members gathered to witness direct action against institutional abuse. The condemned clubhouse stood like a monument to Karen's criminal negligence, its cracking walls and sagging roof about to receive the personal attention they deserved from someone who'd been pushed beyond legal patience. Tommy positioned his wheelchair at the front of the crowd, wearing a t-shirt that read, "Justice is personal," in bold letters. The kid had embraced his role as symbol of what happens when communities stop accepting abuse and start taking direct action. At 9:30 a.m., Karen arrived for what she didn't know would be her final board meeting. She wore a designer business suit and carried herself with the delusional confidence of someone who still believed authority could triumph over accountability. But Karen's final desperate move was yet to come. At 9:45 a.m., she called 911 to report domestic terrorism in progress, as I started the excavator engine for my personal demolition. The emergency dispatcher's response was broadcast through speakerphone. "Ma'am, our records show a permitted demolition of condemned property at your location. Mr. Palmer has proper authorization for owner-operated emergency demolition. This is not a police matter." Even 911 operators knew Karen was delusional. At exactly 10 a.m., as Karen tried to conduct her board meeting in the condemned building, I fired up the excavator and began my personal approach to the clubhouse walls. The machine responded to my controls like an extension of my own will. 2 weeks of training with Danny Martinez had prepared me for this moment of direct justice. Karen rushed outside, screaming at me to stop, demanding I respect her authority as HOA president. But her authority had ended the moment she chose theft over community service, discrimination over human dignity. "You can't do this!" she shrieked over the engine noise. "I'm the president! I have authority!" I looked down at her from the excavator cab, my voice carrying over the crowd through the machine's speaker system. "Your authority ended when you stole from this community and tried to deny my son his right to live here safely." The first swing of the excavator arm connected with the clubhouse wall at 10:15 a.m. exactly. Concrete chunks flew like confetti, while years of deferred maintenance and hidden rot spilled into the Arizona sunshine. Karen stood helpless as I personally demolished her kingdom chunk by chunk, wall by wall, using my own hands and legal authority to deliver the justice that courts and prosecutors had been too slow to provide. The crowd cheered with each swing of my excavator arm, watching a father personally destroy the symbol of institutional oppression that had threatened his disabled son and robbed their community. Within 2 hours, Karen's headquarters had become a pile of rubble created by direct action, personal justice, and one dad's refusal to accept corruption as inevitable. Saturday morning felt like Christmas, the 4th of July, and Personal Justice Day all rolled into one perfect Arizona morning. By 9 a.m., Willowbrook Estates looked like a combination community festival and live-action documentation of direct justice. Food trucks battled for parking spaces while news cameras positioned to capture every moment of my personal demolition. The condemned clubhouse stood like a monument to institutional corruption, its cracking walls and sagging roof about to receive the personal attention they deserved from a father who'd been pushed beyond the limits of legal patience. Tommy positioned his wheelchair at the front of the crowd, wearing a t-shirt that read, "Personal Justice" in bold letters. The kid had embraced his role as the symbol of what happens when families stop accepting institutional abuse and start taking direct action. Detective Sarah Williams stood nearby with final arrest warrants. Karen was facing 8 felony charges, but her real judgment was about to come from my excavator bucket rather than criminal courts. At 9:30 a.m., Karen arrived for what she didn't realize would be her final performance as HOA president. She wore a designer business suit and carried herself with the delusional confidence of someone who still believed authority could triumph over personal accountability. "You cannot proceed with this illegal destruction," Karen announced to the assembled crowd, her voice carrying desperation disguised as authority. "I am the elected president of this community, and I forbid this vigilante action." That's when I climbed into the excavator cab and started the engine. The diesel rumble echoed off surrounding houses like thunder, announcing the storm of justice Karen had been too arrogant to see coming. I'd spent 2 weeks learning to operate this machine specifically for this moment of personal justice. "Marcus, you're making a terrible mistake," Karen screamed over the engine noise. "This is criminal destruction of community property. I'll have you arrested." I looked down at her from the cab, my voice amplified through the machine's speaker system so everyone could hear. "Karen, you stole $67,000 from this community. You tried to ban my son's ambulance. You discriminated against disabled families while robbing every household here. Your authority ended the moment you chose crime over community service." Detective Williams stepped forward with handcuffs ready. "Mrs. Pemberton, you're under arrest for embezzlement, fraudulent schemes, and related felony charges." But Karen wasn't going quietly to jail. She made one final desperate play for sympathy. "This man is destroying community property because his disabled son didn't get special treatment. He's using his child's condition to justify terrorism." That's when Tommy rolled his wheelchair forward and spoke directly into news cameras with the moral authority that comes from surviving institutional oppression. "Ms. Karen," he said, his voice steady and clear, "you stole money that should have kept this building safe. You tried to ban ambulances that saved my life. You called my wheelchair depressing and my medical equipment ugly. You're not the victim here. You're the criminal who's about to watch justice delivered personally." The crowd fell silent as a 16-year-old boy delivered more moral clarity than Karen had shown in years of corrupt leadership. I signaled to the crowd, then addressed Karen directly. "You wanted to protect property values? Watch what your embezzlement and discrimination actually did to community property." At exactly 10:15 a.m., I swung the excavator arm into the clubhouse's front wall. The impact sent a thunderclap across the neighborhood. Concrete chunks flew like confetti while years of hidden rot and decay spilled into the morning sunlight. The second swing brought down the load-bearing supports, revealing water damage, mold, and structural failures that could have killed someone. But this wasn't just demolition. This was personal justice delivered with precision and purpose. Karen stood helpless, handcuffed between detectives, watching me personally destroy the symbol of her corrupt power. Every swing of the excavator arm was a father's answer to institutional abuse, a community's response to criminal theft, a disabled family's refusal to accept discrimination. "Stop!" Karen screamed as I demolished the meeting room where she'd terrorized families. "You're destroying everything I built." "No," I called back over the engine noise. "I'm destroying everything you corrupted." The crowd cheered with each swing of my personally operated excavator. Children applauded while parents hugged. Mr. Patterson saluted with military precision. Rosa wiped tears from her eyes as 2 years of neighborhood tyranny crumbled under direct action. Within 90 minutes, I had personally reduced Karen's headquarters to manageable rubble using legal authority, proper safety protocols, and the kind of hands-on justice that courts had been too slow to deliver. As concrete dust settled over my work, Tommy spoke into media microphones with the voice of someone who'd found his strength through watching his father take direct action. "This isn't just about tearing down a building," he said, his words carrying across news networks that would broadcast our story nationwide. "This is about what happens when communities stop accepting abuse and start taking personal responsibility for justice." The applause that followed lasted until every piece of debris had been loaded for disposal, carrying away the physical remains of institutional corruption and leaving clean ground for building something honest. 18 months later, the rebuilt Willowbrook Community Center gleamed in the afternoon sun like a monument to what personal justice could accomplish when combined with community determination. The smell of fresh paint mixed with blooming desert flowers from our new sensory garden, where children of all abilities played together on equipment I'd personally helped install. The transformation had been remarkable, funded through Karen's criminal restitution and built through community volunteer labor coordinated around my construction expertise. Where the corrupt clubhouse once stood, we'd created something revolutionary, a fully accessible community center that proved direct action could create lasting positive change. Tommy, now 18 and preparing for college with a full scholarship to study civil rights law, spoke at our grand opening ceremony. The kid who'd once been called a property value problem now stood as the symbol of what families could accomplish when they refused to accept institutional abuse. "This center represents something important," Tommy said into the microphone, his voice strong and confident. "Sometimes justice requires personal action, not just legal procedures. My dad didn't just fight corruption. He personally tore it down and built something better." Karen herself was in year 2 of a 5-year state prison sentence for felony theft, fraudulent schemes, and related criminal activities. Her real estate license was permanently revoked, her assets seized for restitution, her reputation destroyed beyond any possibility of professional rehabilitation. But more importantly, her symbol of power had been personally demolished by someone she'd tried to destroy, using legal authority and community support to deliver the direct justice that bureaucratic procedures had been too slow to provide. Our victory extended far beyond one criminal's downfall. The story of my personal demolition had inspired similar direct action across Arizona. Families facing institutional abuse discovered they had legal rights to personal justice when authorities failed to act quickly enough. Tommy's advocacy had led to the Personal Justice Protection Act, Arizona legislation specifically protecting property owners' rights to personally demolish unsafe structures when institutions failed to maintain community safety. Rosa Martinez had been elected HOA president unanimously, But more importantly, our community had learned that ordinary people could take direct action against corruption when traditional authority failed them. The media attention had been transformative. Our story inspired families nationwide to research their own legal rights to direct action against institutional abuse. Tommy appeared on national television explaining how personal justice worked within legal frameworks. Property values in Willowbrook Estates increased 25% following our transformation, proving that communities improved when corruption was personally eliminated rather than simply prosecuted through slow legal procedures. The rebuilt center hosted monthly direct action legal rights workshops, where I taught other families about property demolition rights, equipment operation, and safety protocols for personal justice projects. Every month, ambulances still visited our house for Tommy's routine medical needs. But now, neighbors gathered supportively, understanding that family necessity came before institutional rules, and that sometimes parents had to take direct action to protect their children's rights. 1 year after my personal demolition, Channel 12 News returned for a follow-up documentary. They found a neighborhood transformed not just by new construction, but by the knowledge that ordinary people could personally deliver justice when institutions failed them. The demolition wasn't really about destroying a building, I told the reporter, standing beside the memorial plaque honoring Sarah's memory. It was about proving that fathers will personally tear down any symbol of power that threatens their children's right to exist safely in their community. Tommy, now confident from years of advocacy and direct action, added his perspective. My mom always taught me that justice isn't something you wait for. It's something you personally create. This community learned that lesson through direct action rather than passive hope. The memorial garden surrounding Sarah's plaque had become a gathering place where families shared stories of personal justice, celebrated direct action victories, and supported each other in taking individual responsibility for community improvement. As evening approached and families headed home from another successful community event, I felt the deep satisfaction that comes from personally delivering justice rather than waiting for distant authorities to act. Tommy was thriving academically and socially. Our neighborhood had become a model for communities where personal action created positive change. Karen's corruption had been personally eliminated rather than simply prosecuted. Most importantly, we'd proven that institutional bullies could be personally defeated when communities found the courage to take direct action within legal frameworks. "Dad," Tommy said as we watched children play on equipment we'd personally installed, "Mom would have loved seeing you take personal responsibility for justice instead of waiting for someone else to fix our problems." He was absolutely right. Sarah would have been proud seeing her husband personally demolish institutional oppression, her son become an advocate for direct action, and her community learn that ordinary people could personally create the justice that distant authorities were too slow to provide.
And that's how Marcus Palmer turned Karen's ambulance van into her personal demolition. 5 years in prison and a clubhouse destroyed by the father she underestimated. Here's what Marcus understood. Sometimes justice isn't something you wait for. It's something you personally deliver. While Karen had institutional power, Marcus had something more dangerous. A father's willingness to learn excavator operation and personally tear down corruption. The beautiful irony? Karen's embezzlement created the legal justification for her destruction. Her stolen maintenance funds made the building unsafe, giving Marcus the right to personally demolish her symbol of power. How many of you have dealt with petty tyrants who think authority makes them untouchable? They all count on your belief that you're powerless. Marcus proved that's a lie. He didn't just fight back, he got permits, learned equipment operation, and personally delivered justice through legal channels. What institutional bully in your life needs to learn that ordinary people can take extraordinary action? Drop your story below. Hit subscribe if this inspired you to research your right to personal justice. Next week, how a grandmother used a rented backhoe to dismantle predatory towing. Remember, every bully is just one property code away from watching their kingdom crumble.